Hey, this is The Constant Show where we talk about movies, and I am Constant, not this film's target demographic. That hasn't really stopped any other dudes from sounding off. Let's talk about Barbie. The best way to describe Barbie is precise. It's an hour and 55 minutes long, but it spends its entire runtime loaded with multi-layered symbolism, some subtle, some overt, while juggling picture-perfect aesthetics and an absurdist plot with a lot of room for interpretation. So when I watched this movie, I was pleasantly surprised because I realized I've already seen it, and I love the first iteration of this. Barbie is Fight Club, but for women, and with the scenes shuffled around. Chapter 1. What? I know what you're thinking. How is Fight Club the dudeliest dude movie ever? The exact same thing as Barbie, the ladiest lady movie ever? Well, I'm glad you asked, and I will explain that. But first, I would like you to tell me which one of these movies I'm talking about. So our emotionally stunted protagonist is living in a literally commercial home. At some point during the movie, it'll show us prices of various possessions that the main character owns because a sub-theme of the movie is how individualism struggles under capitalism. We live in a society where we're constantly bombarded with necessarily shallow messages that are designed to appeal to the most possible people. So when we allow that to become an ideal, we become shallow people. You could say that we're as empty as a fridge with only condiments or a pretend glass of milk, as meaningless as a complete IKEA collection or as a dollhouse Nobel Prize. Don't worry about the home too much though, because it's later going to get taken away by the representation of toxic masculinity. Our protagonist is complacent and unthinking. They are the representation of somebody who just blindly accepts all of society's messages as true, until it is shaken by thoughts of death and exhaustion. This causes them to reflect on what it actually means to be a man or woman, I forget which. This self-reflection is paired with a physical transformation as reality sets in on the stereotypical fantasy ideal. So then a joke gets interpreted literally, which causes our protagonist to have their first experience of genuine emotion. However, this emotional experience is vicarious in both situations, as our protagonist doesn't have the emotional maturity to process their own feelings. So they get pushed on their quest by a short-haired, social outcast woman, who at first the protagonist will be repulsed by as society at large is, but later will come to accept as their own idealized version of themselves. Then an ideal self breaks out of a fantasy land to become a semi-real person. Early on in the movie, the protagonist will get called into a meeting with executives, at which point the executives will try to put them in a box, but the protagonist ends up getting chased out of the building. A real person ends up bonding with an idealized version of a gender archetype, causing our protagonist to delve deeper into the world of fantasy. By the time that protagonist reaches their fantasy land, they realize that it's already been overtaken by the physical representation of toxic masculinity, who's already started launching an attack on society and redesigning architecture in his image. So our protagonists, they don't know what to do, so they go back to short-haired woman, before they decide that they're going to confront toxic male directly. And whenever they try to confront toxic male, they lose the initial confrontation. However, they'll later take a symbolic victory, regaining control and autonomy via the same methods that the toxic male archetype used to strip them of it. The protagonist ends the story as a fully realized, fully functional, emotion-processing person, and the story ends on a high note with a vague kind of optimism. Also, they both feature speeches about how you are not your job.
You are not your job.
You're not even beach.
Chapter 2. Battle of the Sexes. That's actually surprisingly similar, right? Even themes and stuff that are just pretty close. Both of them talk about gender and capitalism. What does it mean to be your gender? How is an individual supposed to interact with this hyper-unrealistic ideal that they will be endlessly pressured towards? The weight of societal expectations. To what do we owe our fellow gender? What actually brings meaningfulness to life? I think for that last one they have the same answer: genuine emotion and societal connections. So let's compare two scenes real quick. So in Fight Club...
What is this?
This is a chemical burn. Will hurt more than you've ever been burned, and you will have a scar. Stay with the pain, don't shut this out. Without pain, without sacrifice, we would have nothing.
It's only after we've lost everything that we're free to do anything.
In Barbie, at the end, before she can become a fully realized person, Ruth, the creator of Barbie, says, hey, I need you to know what you're in for. So I'm going to give you an emotional download of a bunch of feelings, and you got to process them and decide if you still want to be alive after all of that. The good, the bad, the ugly. She's smiling, she's crying, it's an experience on her face. In both, we have a character taking the decision upon themselves to stop being numb, to stop being shallow or hollow or complacently unaware, and instead embrace how they feel on a fundamental level, beyond the idea that, to live is to feel. Life can be painful, but there are moments that are worth it, and the thing that is most worth it is the connections that we have between our fellow person. The vicarious aspect of the way that both of our protagonists experience emotion for the first time, the importance that we have in shaping each other's understanding. In the same way that Barbie is able to recruit and awaken other Barbies to her cause.
It is literally impossible to be a woman. You are so beautiful and so smart, and it kills me that you don't think you're good enough.
Tyler Durden does the same thing.
Man, I see in Fight Club the strongest and smartest men who've ever lived. I see all this potential, and I see it squandered.
Barbie's fight is against the rigid expectations that women have in society.
Like, you have to be thin, but not too thin. And you can never say you want to be thin. You have to say you want to be healthy, but also you have to be thin. You have to be a boss, but you can't be mean. You have to lead, but you can't squash other people's ideas. You're supposed to love being a mother, but don't talk about your kids all the damn time. You have to be a career woman, but also always be looking out for other people. You have to answer for men's bad behavior, which is insane, but if you point that out, you're accused of complaining. You're supposed to stay pretty for men, but not so pretty that you tempt them too much or that you threaten other women, because you're supposed to be a part of the sisterhood. You have to never get old, never be rude, never show off, never be selfish, never fall down, never fail, never show fear, never get out of line.
One thing that I find is interesting is that it hits on the concept of Barbie as a concept, and how it's this false kind of feminism where it's like, yeah, women can do anything. A lot of society already hits on so much of like what you're expected to do. One thing I found kind of interesting is I didn't know how to change a diaper until I had a son. And my wife knew how when she was 8. It's a reflection of the idea that women in society will become mothers. The only play option that they have available is just training to become a mom. As a dude, I could have kids, I could have not have kids. Fine either way. You will never hear a dude say anything about my biological clock is ticking. So many women have that experience. Even women who know that they don't want kids are bombarded by messages about how they should. And the reward for Barbie's journey is that she now has independence. She doesn't have to come with an accessory kin if she doesn't want to. She'll go anywhere on her own time because she's a real person. She doesn't have to fit neatly in a box or have her ballerina toes all crooked up. She can just let it hang out. I don't know, get Barbie some sweatpants. She's undergone all this fight against this rigid ideal. Now she can just break free of any expectations that she has for herself. Now, Jack's struggle is against the loose expectations of what it means to be a man.
We're the middle children of history, man. No purpose or place. We have no great war.
Men are supposed to be strong and aggressive. I guess we have like MMA cops and then the military. You're told you should be fighting people right now. Just find someone and punch them in the face. Men are also supposed to be ambitious. They're supposed to be leaders, right? But one of the things that we see in Fight Club is you can't have 2 leaders. And just the logistics of it do not work out. They're also expected to be stoic. The main character's first emotional breakthrough is when there's another man crying on him. The eye-opening that someone of your gender can break the expectation of what it means to be that gender. So are y'all from like Jupiter or something? Gender is a confusing mess of mixed signals that will never be suited for the individual. It's like we as a society at one point realized that there were sex differences. And in our attempt to categorize and define them, we created these rigid labels of what it means to be a man or a woman, incorporating things that have no explanatory value. There's not a good explanation as to why we think blue is manly and pink is girly. One thing that both movies hit on is that you need to break free of those expectations. You need to just be able to be a person. These rigid expectations for what it means to be a man and a woman became a ticking time bomb that would later cause a lot of emotional turmoil for a lot of people. The society created it, and then later on the society used it as an excuse to shame or guilt members of that same society for not living up to our misinterpretation. I think the solution here is that we don't be Barbie women or Ken men. We just kind of be ourselves. Smartest person I know, right, is my son. So my son has this thing that he does where whenever you apply a secondary identifier to him, he just outright rejects it. You'll be like, oh, you're so handsome. And he'll go, I'm not handsome. I'm Iskandar. I was trying to talk to him, and I was like, a man is responsible. He handles his business. And he looks at me and he goes, I'm not a man. I am Iskandar. You're right. Maybe we shouldn't group individuals as rigidly as we do. You should be you, the you. Also, my camera still has batteries, so we're going to talk about this real quick. There's some dude saying that this movie is like misandrous, like it's dude hating. Every dude in the movie is dumb, and then also at the end, unequal society. To address the first one, we see no less than 4 male characters in this movie who are competent in order of competence. The executive at the beginning bravely interrupts a meeting, which risks his job, but it is the right call. The dad at the end, he's learning Spanish for his family. They gave this guy free time, and then the first thing he said was, I'm going to be productive and find a way to connect with my wife and child better. Number 2, the executive, I know what you're thinking. He was a mumbling idiot. He was played by Will Ferrell. Think about this guy for a second, though. Whenever Ken shifts to Kenland, he decides that, A, this is not okay. Even though it's selling better, he's like, this is not how things are supposed to be. Like, you cannot be taking over a woman's fantasy land. I know I took a woman's job, but woman's fantasy land, that's a different story. At first, he rejects the idea of there being, like, these realistic Barbies. But then when they tell him that's gonna make money, he's like, yeah, women love it, and it's gonna make money, sign me up. And then number 1, the most competent person in this movie by far isn't Barbie or even Ruth, it's Alan. Because Alan is strong enough and brave enough to fight off an entire army of Kens by himself, does this casually. On top of that, he's the only person who can navigate and interact with both worlds. He says that Alans go to the real world all the time. This is yesterday to him. If this was his movie, it would be 30 seconds and it would just be that transition scene from him going from one world to the other. On top of that, he's the only character emotionally mature enough to recognize the problems in his society. He realizes, even from the beginning of the movie, he doesn't like how Barbie Land is run. He's not really a fan of this. He knows this without having to have some kind of soul link across the two worlds. So the second one, it's an unjust society. The highest that a Ken can achieve in Barbie Dreamland is a lower circuit judge. I think it's losing the literal for the metaphor. Kens are a toy that was designed as an accessory for Barbie. So a Ken's highest purpose in life is just hanging out with Barbie. It's kind of like the toys in Toy Story. They spend 48 hours playing a guitar song for Barbie. Because this is like a Ken's like ultimate fantasy. If you're a dude watching this, right, is the last fantasy that you had about a woman as dignified as a lower circuit judge? Because if not, then you can't partake in this conversation. We can't treat this as a one-to-one for society, because if you remember in the beginning, they're just giving each other like Nobel Prizes and you're the best writer, Barbie. They're not doing anything. Like, I don't know what you think happens in Barbie Land. The entire society was taken over with just like a vote that was randomly held. And as far as I can tell, they do it weekly. I don't know what legislation you think is going through the Barbie Supreme Court, like comprehensive legal documents you think they're churning out on the Mattel toy line. Because whenever they come out in the box, it's just it's a tiny little piece of paper with nothing on it. Their Supreme Court is like probably voting on like squiggles and stuff. But that's been the movie. Those are my thoughts. I'd love to hear your thoughts in the comment section. Ostracization. That's because a lot of I can hit this, I can hit this, I can hit